Welcome to the Law Society of USA. Today's top story comes from Washington, where Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said he is confident the Supreme Court will uphold President Donald Trump's controversial tariffs. These tariffs, placed on a wide range of imports, have already survived one court battle but now face the ultimate test. At the same time, the administration is quietly preparing a backup plan in case the court rules against them. The outcome could reshape not only America's trade policy but also the boundaries of presidential power for years to come. To understand why this case matters, let's go back to the beginning. The tariffs were imposed under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, better known as IEEPA. This law was created during the Cold War, at a time when the United States feared sudden threats to national security. It gives the president broad authority to act in times of declared emergency, usually to restrict trade, freeze assets, or respond to hostile foreign actions. Over the years, presidents from both parties have used IEEPA, mostly to sanction countries like Iran, North Korea, or Russia. But rarely has it been stretched as far as it is today, being used as the legal backbone for a sweeping trade war. Last week, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled by a 7-4 vote that most of Trump's so-called reciprocal tariffs were illegal. The judges argued that the administration exceeded the scope of its authority. Yet, in a striking move, the court allowed those tariffs to remain in place until mid-October, giving the White House time to appeal. That appeal is now headed straight to the Supreme Court, setting the stage for a historic legal showdown. Scott Bessent has defended the tariffs with two arguments. The first is economic. He insists that America has faced decades of unfair trade practices, especially from China, and that tariffs are the necessary tool to correct the imbalance. The second is far more controversial. Bessent has linked tariffs to the fight against the fentanyl epidemic. Nearly 70,000 Americans die each year from fentanyl overdoses. Bessent argues that this qualifies as a genuine national emergency, and that emergency gives the president the right to use IEEPA to impose tariffs, not just sanctions. By framing the opioid crisis as a national security threat, the administration is trying to broaden the definition of emergency powers in ways never tested before. This legal battle is about more than imports and exports. It is about the balance of power inside the American system of government. If the Supreme Court sides with Trump, it will effectively expand the reach of IEEPA, giving future presidents greater freedom to use emergency declarations for economic policy. That could set a precedent where presidents bypass Congress to impose trade measures or other sweeping policies under the label of emergency. But if the court rules against Trump, it would place new limits on presidential authority, reaffirming that Congress, not the White House, has the constitutional power to regulate trade. Either way, the ruling will echo far beyond tariffs. Even as Bessent voices confidence, he admits the administration has a fallback option. If the Supreme Court strikes down the use of IEEPA, Trump could turn to a law passed nearly a century ago, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. Buried within that act is Section 338, which allows the president to impose tariffs of up to 50% for 5 months on imports from countries that discriminate against U.S. trade. While temporary and limited, this tool could still be used as leverage, especially against China. It is a reminder that even if IEEPA is off the table, other legal avenues remain open. The economic impact of this uncertainty is already being felt. Businesses and consumers are caught in the middle. If tariffs continue, prices on imported goods are likely to rise, fueling inflation and squeezing household budgets. If they are struck down, industries that have relied on tariff protections, like steel, agriculture, and some manufacturing sectors, could suddenly face tough competition from abroad. Wall Street is watching nervously, because markets dislike one thing above all else: unpredictability. And with the Supreme Court preparing to weigh in, unpredictability is exactly what investors face. To put this in perspective, the use of tariffs as a political weapon is not new. The United States has fought trade wars before. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan imposed tariffs on Japanese electronics and steel. In the early 2000s, President George W. Bush placed tariffs on imported steel, only to see them overturned by the World Trade Organization. But what makes today's case different is the legal foundation. Those earlier tariffs were justified under trade laws that clearly gave presidents temporary authority. Trump's tariffs rest on IEEPA, a law designed for national emergencies, not ordinary trade disputes. That is why this case has become such a constitutional test. On the international stage, America's trading partners are watching every move. China, the main target of Trump's tariffs, sees them as a direct challenge. If the Supreme Court upholds the tariffs, Beijing is likely to retaliate, deepening tensions between the world's two largest economies. For America's allies, the bigger question is how much unilateral power the U.S. president should have. If one person can use emergency powers to reshape global trade, it raises concerns about stability and predictability in international markets. The fentanyl argument adds another layer of controversy. By connecting trade policy to the opioid crisis, the administration is setting a precedent that almost any domestic issue could be framed as a national emergency to justify extraordinary action. Legal scholars warn that this blurs the line between genuine emergencies, like war or terrorism, and long-term policy challenges. Critics argue that if the court allows such an interpretation, it could open the door for future presidents to use emergency powers far more broadly than Congress ever intended. As the clock ticks toward the Supreme Court hearings, both supporters and opponents of the tariffs are preparing their cases. Business groups are divided. Some manufacturers support the tariffs, saying they level the playing field against cheap imports. Retailers and consumer advocates oppose them, warning that higher prices hit American families hardest. Politically, Trump's allies frame the case as a fight for American sovereignty, while his opponents call it an abuse of executive authority. Whatever the outcome, this case will shape the legal and economic landscape for years to come. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of Trump, future presidents may find themselves with a powerful new tool, able to invoke national emergencies to justify economic policies without congressional approval. If the court rules against, it will reaffirm Congress's role as the ultimate authority on trade, forcing the White House to negotiate rather than act alone. Either way, the ruling will become a landmark in American constitutional law. The hearings are expected within weeks, with a decision likely before the end of the year. Until then, uncertainty hangs over the economy, over global trade, and over the limits of presidential power. One thing is certain, this is more than just a trade dispute. It is a test of the American system itself. This has been today's report from the Law Society of USA. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more updates on the legal battles shaping our world. And stay tuned as we continue to follow this historic case all the way to the Supreme Court.